So tonight at the Active Travel Cafe, we'll start with our usual crowdsourced news updates. So if you have anything that you'd like to share, anything that's happening locally, or if you want to talk about something that's happening nationally, or even internationally, then please get your thinking caps on, put your hands up. We'd love to hear from you. Following that, we have a talk from the University of Westminster's Active Travel Academy, and Ersilia Verlinghieri, and will be sharing research that Harrie, Larrington-Spencer and she have been working on into disabled people's experience of low traffic neighbourhoods in London, something that I know that people will be really interested in hearing about. So before we move on to that, does anyone have any news that they would like to share this week? I can't believe that nobody has anything to share. Robin.
Yes, I have news. The Citizens' Assembly on Transport in Oxfordshire has reported its recommendations. And so this is a process where originally 30 citizens randomly selected profiled to match the population of Oxfordshire, and 34 of them went through the whole process, worked together over 6 weeks in 11 sessions. That they got expert information and then views and opinions from businesses and residents, and was set the question of how would you improve transport in Oxfordshire. And then they came out with 20 recommendations, and the recommendations were a car-free city centre, designated routes for buses and cycling, essentially 15-minute neighbourhoods as we know them, improved park and rides, better cycling routes. It was all very public transport, active travel friendly, and reducing road motor traffic and motor vehicle congestion and harm. They really it just goes to show when you get an average set of people and give them the information and time to discuss it and think it over, they come up with some very sensible conclusions. And I will post links into the chat on the kind of the recommendations report. The full report won't be out for a while because A, it takes a bit of time to write, and B, the local elections will get in the way. But the recommendations, I think people here will all appreciate, and there's a couple of social media links that you can follow it up on and and put helpful comments on.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, I spotted that. It'd be really interesting to find out a bit more about that and the kind of information they were given and the responses. Mark. Mark seems to have frozen. Oh, no. Mark, can you? No. Ruth, do you want to come in?
Hi, lovely day down here. I'm cribbing off Harrogate, which I often do because my sister lives there. And the great news there is that they organised a bike bus, which allowed children to cycle to school safely, and it'll become permanent thanks to a successful traffic reduction trial. The School Street scheme has been adopted in Harrogate following 18 months of restrictions on drop-off and pick-up times on Beechwood Grove near Oatland Junior School, which is fantastic news from Harrogate, because I don't know if you all know, but outside the station, they had a £10 million plan, which hit the wall and councillors and locals objected. So unfortunately, the nice entrance to Harrogate won't happen, but this shows slowly something nice is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And on that note, we'd be really interested to hear about school street schemes, that sort of outside of London school street schemes that are happening now, particularly with camera enforcement, which is relatively new outside London. So if anybody knows anybody who's been involved in any of that work and you think might like to speak, then please let us know. Mark.
Sorry, my microphone wasn't working earlier. Headset, I was hearing you, but you weren't hearing me. So two things. One is national, one's local. So nationally, interesting what Robin said, because I was sitting next to Charlie Hicks, Oxfordshire County Councillor, last night at the all-party group, which was Chris Boardman doing basically a tour de force about everything that he's been working on and how he's going to be working with the government. Hopefully there'll be a report, because I wasn't taking detailed notes, but hopefully somebody will be doing a report. And people were asking how much money, Roger Geffen particularly was saying, how much money will there be, and so on. There was a lot of, he couldn't really say, because there are things that are going on that he obviously can't talk about, and there are probably things that he isn't able to push on. My particular thing, which I'd be keen to work with other people on, is what's going to happen on the new combined authorities that are being set up. Because he was understandably saying, well, the ones we've got, like Greater Manchester, so are doing really well. But my point was, that's great, but what about the ones that haven't been set up for the areas that don't exist, like Surrey, Kent and so on? How are you going to make sure that they start work really well and don't wait 2 years before they... So I suggested mentoring, pairing up with the ones that are doing well. And Oxfordshire is probably going to be one of those, I presume, at some point as well. So those sort of areas. There was mention of North Yorks and Yorkshire. York and North Yorkshire. And that's a brand new one, so it'd be interesting to hear from anyone in that part of the world what mistakes though, or if they're doing really well, So that's the national one. The local one is just our cabinets meeting in Brighton on Thursday, and after 2 years of saying they were never going to bring in ANPR cameras, they're not going to do anything about it. There's an item on red routes, and snuck in the bottom of one of the paragraphs, it says we're going to bring in ANPR cameras for school streets. We're going to apply, to the next round of DFT applications. Basically, it's the school streets in Brighton that are run by parent-led volunteers are now failing because the parent volunteers are not volunteering, and they're all going to have to stop. Well, there won't be any enforcement, so they're going to have to do something. So it'd be interesting is what you were saying about school streets outside. The parent model just doesn't seem to be sustainable in the long term because of churn in parents, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just, it depends on the capacity of the parents in the school, doesn't it? And can't really be reliant on that. So yeah.
Well, they're trying to get teachers to do it, which isn't great. So, yeah. Thanks.
Mark. Jack.
Hi, I've not contributed before, but I've been coming on to a few of these, so I thought I should. So I live in Kendal, and we had quite a good session that had been sort of pushed by our Bicycle Mayor for Cumbria, Richard. And we had a get together to talk about some presentations that are related to active travel in Kendal. And there was a real sort of buzz off the back of that about having some campaigning group. I know that our Bicycle Mayor was really pushing to get some focus on having a kind of campaigning group in Kendal. And I think somehow that's kind of fallen on me to sort of draw that together. So it feels slightly daunting. We all have a lot going on top of an interest in active travel. But I know there's a lot of people who really want to see some development there in our area. We've just, recently been awarded some funding from Active Travel England and from the Levelling Up funding to go on to active travel. So there's a group of people who want to see that spent in the, best value for money from that. So it's all sort of exciting, and yeah, definitely. If anyone has tips on sort of that starting point for, a campaigning group, which I'm sure a lot of people do, I'm all ears, or any key tips and tricks. Yeah, that's all. Cheers.
Jack, well, good luck with it. It sounds exciting. If anybody has got tips, please put them in the chat. But I think we have had past sessions on setting up campaign groups. So if you do a search on our website, you might find something. But it is a while since we've had something around this. So again, if somebody would like to talk about setting up a campaign, your experience of that, again, get in touch. It would be really great to have something around that again, I think. Does anybody else have any news? I can see Tim waving. Go for it.
Thanks. I can't make the new version of Zoom work for me. Jack, there's a London Cycling Campaign are running a free event on a Saturday early in April, I think, on campaigning tips and tricks and so on. So it'll be on the cycling campaign, London Cycling Campaign website. Someone on here will know, but we'll put it in the chat.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I have a feeling there's quite a bit on their website as well about.
There's probably so much out there. I just, it's finding it all and thinking about it. Yeah. Cheers.
Does anybody have anything else? No. Okay, in that case, we'll move on to our speaker section tonight. And as I mentioned, we've got Ersilia, are you there? Ersilia Verlinghieri and Harrie Larrington-Spencer, who are going to share their research on disabled people's experience of low traffic neighbourhoods. Ersilia, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm here. Just a second, I will share my screen.
Great.
Okay, can you see the slides?
They're coming, yes. Brilliant. Great. Go for it.
So thank you very much. My name is Ersilia. I'm a senior research fellow at the Active Travel Academy, University of Westminster, and this is part of a bit of research Harrie's been leading on. Unfortunately, Harrie only has access to the chat, but she will be helping me with the debate and answering to questions today. The research is part of a much bigger project, which is called Low Traffic Neighbourhoods in London, which is a 3.5 years project which we've been doing at the University of Westminster in collaboration with London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and with the University of Cambridge and with Transport for All, a disabled people-led organisation. The research was funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research, so you can see their logo on the slide as they've been kindly supporting the research. Today we're going to focus on one aspect of the research, which is some interviews and focus group we've been doing with residents in low traffic neighbourhoods in London. I assume I don't have to explain you what a low traffic neighbourhoods is, so I'll move on to the research context, but if you want to discuss also how we defined and study LTNs, I can get to that into the Q&A sessions. So we know that LTNs have been largely implemented in London, especially since 2020, although we know that they exist from much earlier with different names. We all know that there have been quite controversial measures. There's been a lot of polarization around schemes, especially thanks or because of a lot of debates in the media, because of the topic becoming very much politicized. And we also know that in that context, disabled people experiences have been often cited as an issue, often weaponized, and certainly there are open questions about what do disabled people really think about those measures and what are their experiences. To date, there's very little research. I must quote Transport for All earlier report, which has been highlighting some of the concerns disabled people wanted highlighted on schemes, and we wanted to follow up on that with some more research. So as part of this broader project, which was evaluating the impacts of 7 schemes in London, we focused on 4 schemes, which are the 4 schemes you see mapped on the right-hand side of the slide. You see the maps are a bit have lots of lines, especially maps of LTNs 1, 2, and 3. This is because we mapped them by walking with participants. So we ran for each LTN 20 repeated interviews with residents and asked residents to take us around the LTN and walk around the schemes and discuss their experiences of the schemes. So the maps are the GPS tracks of the walks we did with residents. For LTNs, we only run focus groups, so it's a map we did ourselves just by highlighting the boundary roads of the scheme. As I said, this is the presentation today is based on a smaller part of data, so I'm focusing on the findings of 4 or 7 focus groups that we ran in these 4 case studies LTNs, and also a subset of the go-along interviews we did. So this go-along interviews with disabled residents, which we did in the 3 schemes where we ran the interviews. And I'm gonna focus on firstly the findings related to what people think about walking, wheeling, and driving and cycling in the low traffic neighborhood. I'm actually not gonna talk much about cycling because we felt that for disabled residents, walking, wheeling, and driving were the most popular modes of transport, and I want to focus on what they told us about their experiences. With regard to walking and wheeling, participants really share with us appreciation of how easier and more pleasant was to walk within the LTN areas, given the reduction in motor traffic. They stressed a lot of, there's a lot of quotes highlighting how people felt safe when crossing the roads, given the reduced volume of traffic. They felt they were able to work in wheel on the road because of that, and they felt that the quieter streets were important for some of them, especially for neurodivergent participants. There was, however, a quite strong disappointment with regard to the lack of improvements to basic pedestrian infrastructures. We ran a parallel study where we'll be looking at how people use the spaces. So we used a lot of video data to see how people interacted with infrastructure, and we particularly focused on people using mobility aids. And we realized that poor paving infrastructure was quite a problem, even when the LTNs were introduced. There was not much change reporting around boundary roads with regard to walking and wheeling. There was a common perception of these were busier roads from before, and difficult with crossing those roads because of them being busy, even where there were pedestrian crossings. When talking about driving in around LTNs, participants felt that journeys were longer. Our quantitative data, which has been we used to monitor LTNs, show that in fact there is an increase, although often quite small, on journey times. But participants felt that this was creating quite important difficulties, especially for those who were using vehicles as mobility aids. This was impacting the social and family life, and it was impacting the personal life. Some participants reported increasing pain from the more time they had to spend sitting inside vehicles. There was a discussions around blue badge exemptions. We know that at this point, many local authorities have been introducing blue badge exemption for some LTNs, but participants reporting it being hard to apply for the exemptions, or exemption being limited to some of the filters and making it hard for a lot of the other journeys that we're doing in their everyday lives. There is also another aspect of walking, of like traveling in around LTNs, which is taking taxis and Ubers. That is a mode of transport which is very important for disabled people that live in the areas, and which has been perhaps not very much covered in previous research, and we felt that we should talk about it more. Taxis are a very important mode of transport for many participants who cannot drive, who do not own a car, but who require a door-to-door transport. And unfortunately, accessing taxis and Ubers has been substantially harder since the LTNs was introduced. This was especially hard in the first year implementation, where taxis were still getting used to the changes in the area, but still 2 years after implementation, we had complaints regarding trips being declined by drivers, or people being dropped off at model filters rather than at their doorsteps, which creates quite a lot of challenges for some disabled participants. They talk a lot about increased mental load and anxiety in terms of arranging transport, in terms of dealing with taxi drivers and communicating their needs. And some of them, unfortunately, reported even reducing the amount of traveling they do because of those challenges. As I said, these are what emerged from discussing with participants. I forgot to say that our focus group were a pan-disability focus group, so we had participants discussing together the challenges from this perspective of very diverse experiences. And when we bring this finding together, I think it's very important to highlight that disabled people have very diverse and nuanced experiences of LTNs, because they have individualized embodiments of disability, which interact with the personal, social, material, and economic context and circumstances. So each story is different. People with the same impairment might have a very different experience of what the LTN does to them, and they might have a very different view on what the LTN, We also been talking about the fact that within LTNs, there are lots of access frictions. And with this term, we mean the fact that access needs of some disabled people seem incompatible with the needs of other disabled people. So really access friction exists when the access of some people might friction with an access of another person. One interesting example is, for example, we can think of other policies, but for example, like bright street lights are often necessary for pedestrians with low vision to navigate at night, but the same intervention might be creating overstimulation for neurodivergent pedestrians. So there are things that would impact people with different impairments in different ways, and we need to be aware of these frictions. We're also talking about the fact that it's also important to realize that these frictions are very common for many policies. I talk about street lighting, they're very common also for lots of other active travel infrastructures, and I'm very sure that you're aware of the debate around the bus stop bypasses. And if you want to read a very interesting piece that Harrie has been putting together, really thinking about access friction and bus bypasses, you just published that a few months ago. And I think, so our research is really like, once we highlighted all these challenges, the question remains on how can we respond to these challenges? Certainly maintaining the status quo is not an option, because we know that disabled people have very unpleasant experience, and they have a lot of issues with getting around. So the status quo is not an option, but we need to solve this friction. We need to think about solutions which are more inclusive, and even if we're not used to it. And in the slide, we wanted to stress that the status quo, it is not a good option, but sometimes it's less controversial because we're more used to it. So one way that we want to suggest to deal with those challenges is what Harrie has been calling collective access making. Is the idea that we can create access collectively instead of individually, recognizing and embracing the diversity of disabled people experiences and needs. So not trying to create an urban environment which is fully accessible, because this never exists. There will always be conflicts and controversy, but an urban environment where no one is excluded and everyone has the best access experience possible. So I think this concept is really interesting in putting forward a different way of understanding interventions, and how can they be, how different negative aspects of them can be mitigated. We think, and this has been stressed many times, an importance of improved and sensitive communication, really communicating what interventions are doing, why are they implemented in a way that is accessible to everyone, and in a way that is being heard by everyone. So really thinking about that if a change is 3 times as difficult for disabled people, communication needs to be 3 times better with them and with that group. From the research, we also wanted to highlight how important it is to take into account people who use taxis and private hire. There's been a lot of focus upon exemption for private vehicles, or people that use private vehicles, which perhaps reflects a very motonormative assumption that individual car use is priority, but we're failing to consider that disabled people that do not own cars have been left behind, and we tend to prioritize those that own vehicles, but there are other ones that will need some measure to help them accessing their mobility aids as cars. And finally, it's important to ensure that benefits of reduced level of motor traffic can be maximized for disabled people. This means that, as I was saying, for example, it is crucial that pedestrian infrastructure are at the highest quality as possible. A lot of the LTNs have been reducing motor traffic volumes, but they don't really provide good pavement quality, which are fundamental for people getting around. People will stick to pavement in most cases, and they need to be able to access them all the time. There is also a very important debate to be had on people's ability to access mobility aids, being them adapted cycles or any other mobility aids are very expensive, and a lot of disabled people do not walk because they cannot access those aids. And this means like incentives to acquire them, and also having the ability to storage them appropriately. And I think this is mostly what we wanted to talk about with you today and share some of the findings. We're very happy to discuss more. So just put in the slide a couple of suggestions. If you want to ask us questions about the findings, we can give you some more details, or we can also give you more details on the methods we used to do our research or any other aspects of the research. So thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to discussing with you this.
Thank you, Ersilia. That was fantastic. It's just, you know, there's such an interesting bit of research, and I'm sure there'll be questions. I will have a look in the Q&A in a minute. I'm going to start by asking you a couple. If people want to put their hands up and ask questions too, then they're welcome to do that. I wondered whether, I suppose, that so the areas that you looked at, are they areas that they've had these kind of very sort of fast and dirty LTNs, then they haven't had kind of, you know, I don't know, that sort of permanent infrastructure or changes. Is that right?
Thanks for a good question. It's a mixed. It's a mix. So one of the LTNs actually had some transformations or improvements, and with some parallel research we've been doing, we observe how these were crucial to improve access. So as I said, we've been doing a parallel study where we had some pixelated cameras, so they are anonymous, but we can see how people use the infrastructure. And we noticed that where the payments were improved, there was a continuous payment at junctions and a widened payment. The way people, especially people using wheelchairs or other mobility aids, were really traveling in a much smoother way, which make us assume that that was a very important improvement. We also noticed that in that case, a lot of people that use, for example, mobility scooter had less issues with like negotiating space with other users because the pavement was wider and they didn't have to constantly stop and start letting others pass. So that's a very important point, but more than just this visual evidence, we have all participants stressed that was one of the main barriers. Absence of drop curbs, a lot of obstruction on pavements, and I think we all know, and yeah, parked cars, we all know that they are like a main barrier. So I think one of the important things, if we really want to make these LTNs work, we need to work at the same time on walkability and wheelability, which is an interesting concept I've been reading about, like it's walking and wheeling that needs to be really facilitated around those areas.
And I wonder what you thought about, so, I mean, there's obviously those access frictions that have to be kind of worked through, but in terms of the introduction of those schemes, even if some of that more thought is put into that, because they're so political, often it's also very uncertain when they might appear, how long they might be, you know, all of that. I mean, I don't know, did people talk about the uncertainty around that? I can imagine that if the more difficult it is to travel, then the more that uncertainty of when is this thing going to come in? Oh, this thing just appeared without anyone telling me. Now it's going to work, you know, like kind of what's happening in terms of the kind of the future of it. That must, I mean, was that something that people talked about? People be stressful?
Absolutely, and that's why, like we say, like improved and sensitive communication, because like it's not just like, I think there's two things. One is communicating why things are happening, like, and one thing we experience in our research is that even by organizing a pan-disability focus groups and having that time to get in the same room people with different experiences, different views, things moved, like people got understood why some other people might be against or in favor, and having those spaces to discuss and having those spaces to really also like know why those measures are implemented is very important. Clear communication is also crucial for those journeys are very difficult. So like, as I mentioned, like a lot of the issues around taxi drivers not being aware of changes in the first months of implementation is also because things are not being communicated properly. So it's all about, there's also a discussion about how there are like signage and like advanced communication about changes to any part of the street layout and yeah. So.
I'll take some of the questions from the Q&A now. So Bev says, what solutions would you suggest, or what could be done to find those solutions? I don't know, Bev, whether you want to elaborate on that any further, or I don't know if that's solutions to kind of resolving access frictions, perhaps.
Shall I respond?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, if the solutions were to the issues we saw in terms of frictions, I think the idea of really creating spaces for creating collective accesses is fundamental. So having places of discussion which are accessible, which means having them at appropriate times, paying participants for attending, and a lot of things we already know because campaigners have been telling these things since a long time, where we can have a pan-disability discussion about finding ways that to get as good access for everyone as we can, and readapt the science and readapt measures to the specific context. So I don't think there is one solution that fits all. It's really like discussing solutions with communities that are affected when and before things are implemented, or as things are being implemented. As I said, we have some guidelines. It's really making sure that every mode is taken into account. For example, we think that taxis and private hire not really been part of the discussion. Is talking about exemptions with those that need exemptions, and making the process of applying for exemptions much easier, because that was one thing we were reported very many times. Participants, like, sometimes they gave up because the process was so demanding, and we know that like people are often time poor and they don't have it's applying might be very challenging. So yeah, I don't have an answer. We don't have an answer for everything, but it's really like being open to finding those answers with the people that know the answer, because they're experiencing those issues. And I think like there are organizations that do fantastic work around this. We've been working with Transport for All. There's a lot of other like disabled people-led organizations which do local work, which I think should be brought in the discussion, but not just as a lobby group that talk about it. It's like being integrated in the planning process, really.
Thank you. And then I have another question from Tim on reduced or increased traffic levels. The word felt was used. Were you able to get quantitative data as well?
Thanks, Tim. It's a brilliant question. Yes, we've been collecting before and after data and intervention and control data for 3 years, and we are analyzing those data now. So I don't want to promise anything, but hopefully we can get back to you with a quite solid answer to that question. We also been trying to compare perceived changes to traffic level with quantitative data to show how sometimes there are discrepancies which are to do with the fact that quantitative data use averages, they use like an intervention level view, whereas people's will be affected and be thinking about the effects on a very specific place and time in the LTN, and how can we bring these two evidence together to create interventions that work for everyone. So thinking about the experience of congestions and changes in congestion and the actual measured ones. In general, we found that interventions on this, as I said, we will publish this with all the details of methodologies. We found that there was a slight increase on boundary roads on the first year, but the effects were going down by the second year, and there is nothing left in the years going ahead. We will share those findings in the next few months. We're closing the projects soon. And yeah.
I was going to say, it's interesting that they're still reporting people taxi, after all that time. You'd think that that would, would caught up with that. I suppose it would be interesting to see whether that continues as well, that it's difficult to get taxis.
I think there's also, I think there's something to deal also with communicating with drivers and making sure that they understand that like a few 100 meters walk is not okay for some people, and that they really need to give the service they're required, even if it takes a slightly longer journey for them. And as I say, like giving like compensating participants for the extra cost of these things, or creating a system of exemption is fundamental. We don't really know why this is happening. even years after the intervention. But yeah, I guess it's a mix of like local authorities taking action, but also like the individuals being that give the service being sensitive to the requirements of the people using taxis, and we know that this is a broader issue that disabled people are facing in general. Yeah.
And do you think, in terms of giving exemptions, then would that be is it possible to do that so that it's not all taxis, but for specific journeys?
I don't know if Harrie is able to respond to that in the chat, but I think there are some options that she was thinking about in writing up this, and I think there are, for example, taxi vouchers that could be given to participants to deal with the extra cost. I'm not sure how an exemption will work for everyone for all taxis, but it is important to find solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, and but also I suppose targeted at the people who need those solutions.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else have we got here? So Shannon asks, what type of basic pedestrian infrastructure were not provided? And I think you commented already on drop curbs, but she also wonders whether there were any comments on the use of block paving or uneven surfaces.
Yeah, all of that was commented on. And in general, like, we have lots of good people saying pavements were awful. We also been observing a lot of obstructions on pavements, it being bins, it being like not much parked vehicles, because in the area, I mean, that doesn't happen, or we know it happens in other places. But for example, like even parked bikes or hired bikes or scooter were an issue. So it's about pavement clutter, it's about good drop curbs, and it's about good surface, because there's a lot of like uneven surfaces that create frictions for people that are using those pavements.
Well, I can see Harrie in the chat has said there is a scheme in Hackney Council giving exemptions to taxi cards.
Okay.
So, but not applicable to LTNs. So yeah, that's interesting to watch. And I'll take another one from I'll take one more from the Q&A, H, and then I'll come to you. So Shan asks, how much impact do you think the more widespread pavement parking outside London has on the applicability of your findings elsewhere? I.e. pavements being substantially blocked may already exclude disabled people, so how this might affect the balance benefit-disbenefit.
As I say, like I mentioned before, pavement parking, because it is part of the conversation. I mean, any type of obstruction, but certainly if we can assume that even where like levels of motor traffic are lower, as within LTNs, participants prefer walking and wheeling on pavements. It means that even more where levels of motor traffic are higher, we should make sure the pavements are unobstructed and usable by everyone else. And this is, I think, the first thing we should think about when we talk about walking, wheeling, and accessibility. So I don't think we like, as I say, like findings are applicable in terms of these general guidelines we're giving, but there is already tons of evidence about the importance of like good quality walking infrastructure for access, and we'd be very, very happy to share some references if you want to read some more stuff on that. But just to mention, I mean, there's like a lot of work that Living Streets have been doing on paving, which you can have a look at.
Great, thank you. If only we could get more of that guidance in action. But H, did you have a question for Ersilia? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it relates to one I put in the Q&A. I was working on something in 1996 where it was looking at having a single card or a phone app that you could hire bikes, use a bus, hire a car club car, all that sort of thing as a single app transparently, which would mean they could then transfer to the most appropriate transport you needed for the job in hand. I wondered whether that sort of blends in with what you're looking at LTNs, and if it was easy to be able to travel somewhere on a bus, but the final mile to the door, you could just jump in a taxi for a flat fare, and the taxi would be ready to meet the bus. I'm aware that Shearings do this because they don't send a coach around all the Lancashire mill towns. now, they offer free taxis from your door to a coach hub on the M6 where everybody gets on the coach at the same place because it's cheaper for them.
Thanks a lot. We didn't have any discussion on this in the research, so I'm just like responding based on things I've read, or a few things that came up from the interviews. Firstly, certainly public transport is a fundamental part of creating accesses, and I think having accessible public transport means also making sure that people can get to the public transport stops either by walking, wheeling, or yes, when they need taxis, why not? And I think we also know that cost is a major barrier to access for disabled people, especially because they're often also like on low incomes. And I think one thing I forgot to mention is the importance of thinking intersectionally about those issues, like making sure that when we talk with disabled people, we think about different groups within disabled peoples. I don't have a precise answer, but I think like the discussion on public transport and accessibility should be also part of the conversation we are having in active travel, because it is to an extent supporting active travel, and a lot of walking journeys are happening because they're linking journeys with public transport.
Yeah, and I think it'd be sort of interesting to follow what Active Traveller England are doing around this, because the conference that I went to in the Northeast that they were at recently, they were talking a lot about active travel, linking up with public transport. And I mean, for both active travel and public transport, there's obviously huge amounts has to be done to make that really accessible. And how you join that up, without it being just quite tokenistic, I guess is a bit of thought. Guy, you have a hand up, and then I'll take another from the Q&A.
Oh yeah. I was interested to know, did anyone talk about new opportunities they had to engage in active travel? So for instance, feeling more enabled to use a trike in the same way a lot of people feel safer within LTNs to use any kind of cycle. And I was also interested if anyone, I heard you talk about people going in the highway, which on the face of it is fine, but I wondered how acceptable people felt that was. You do see people using mobility scooters, for instance, on quite busy roads sometimes, purely because the footway is so dire. So I just wondered if they felt that was okay now they're in a low traffic neighborhood, or whether they still felt it was, just how acceptable was it? Thanks.
Acceptable for the people using the mobility scooter or for others?
Yeah, acceptable to say, oh, now you can go in the road. The footway's still crap, but you can use the road because there's hardly any cars. I wondered if people felt that was fine or not.
So on the interviews and focus group, we definitely had some people like sharing with us that they started using more the carriageway because at least there were all these bumps and frictions that they found on pavements, and they felt it was okay. But as I said, the majority of people still relies on pavements, and it's a minority of people that use mobility aids that feels okay to use the road. We also had a look at mobility scooters use of whether they were shifting from the road on the pavement. We noticed that in some of the LTNs there was a slight increase of people moving from pavement to roads when we're talking just mobility scooters. It's not statistically significant, unfortunately, because it's a very small sample. It's a week of observation of roads, but so we assume that they felt safer in doing that because of the level of motor traffic going down, so they felt it was okay to use the road instead of going on pavements. But as I say, it's still a minority of people that travel in those areas, that walk or wheel in those areas. Was it something else you asked me at the beginning? Sorry if I missed.
Oh, I was curious if people saw new opportunities for how to get around as well. For instance, feeling more enabled to use a trike or any type of modified cycle, purely because the road was quieter.
Yeah, I can't recall specific instances of that. Harrie might, because we've been interviewing different people. We did like hundreds of interviews, so sometimes. But certainly there was, I mean, more in general, like I think the finding is that a lot of people found it easier to get around within the LTN. So for example, there's a lot of instances of like parents feeling it's easier to get around with the children. We also quantitatively seeing that there's a lot more children like using small bikes and small scooters, and a slight increase in children independence. So children are less likely to hold hands with parents, and they're actually left going around on their own. And again, this is emerging findings from the biggest data set. I don't think there is much on adaptive cycles, unfortunately, and certainly this is something that we need to work on, because even the ability of, and then I think just Harrie's been typing now in the chat, we had one trike user and she had mixed experience of the LTN, and she says she felt some drivers felt they could drive faster, not look for other road users because there were fewer vehicles, and she says she'd been doored a couple of times within a local LTN. So as I say, it's always mixed experiences, but I don't know if there are people that kind of starting using a trike because of the LTN.
Yeah, I was just interested about that barrier, because in my own LTN, it's not like people are instantly going to say, oh, I'll buy a £4,000 cargo bike.
Yeah.
Just because the LTN's been there for 18 months, and I realise the barrier is even higher for quite a lot of adapted equipment, where it can exceed £10,000, and it's a significant investment. So yeah, thank you for those answers.
Thanks. And I mean, and that's why it's very important to recognize that these things are mobility aids and should be much cheaper. Like it's a bit, it is a question of fairness. Like they cannot be so expensive. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think it's that sort of, again, that kind of thinking around what people need to support them if they do want to change how they move around at that very early stage. But you know, if it's an experimental order and it's for 18 months, people are not going to want to buy something that, you know. So yeah, I think that kind of time issue again is, I guess poses a lot of challenges, doesn't it? And that uncertainty around what happens.
Yeah.
I take another one. Jack says, really important area of work to focus on. Oh, that question just moved. Overall, did disabled people that you interviewed feel that active travel schemes, including LTNs, were on the whole positive for them, as the news often gives the impression that active travel is bad for disabled people?
As I said, experiences and views were mixed. So some people felt it was really making their lives easier. Some people felt it was making things harder. And I mean, disabled people is not an homogeneous group. There's people have different experiences, intersects with a lot of different personal situations, different impairments, different like living conditions. So, and that's why I think our research is also advised to like unpack what the disabled people group is, and trying to understand that within that there are frictions, there are different views, there are different experiences. And as I say, some people, especially people that relied on walking and cycling, wheeling, felt it was helping, and people that relied on driving or taxis were feeling it was kind of creating some challenges. And it's important to think about those challenges where those are people that have been systematically like disadvantaged in current transport systems.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so kind of interesting to hear your findings, because it's, you know, we can think about them away from maybe that heated context where people are, you know, disabled people are being used on either side to support arguments, rather than, you know, thinking about like what do people actually need.
And I think, and it's very important because a lot of the disabled people experience have been really weaponized in the debate, and I think it's important to let them kind of tell their own story about LTNs without like instrumentalizing, because as much as it's true that some people that drive find it harder to get around, that doesn't necessarily mean that they oppose the scheme. Sometimes they would want to have like exemption, they would want to have some adaptation, but they might still want the LTNs to go in. Like it's a very complex word, and simplifications and like really like polarizing the debate means we're missing opportunities to make it work.
Adam asks, do your findings and conclusions align with Active Travel England's community consultation and engagement within transport schemes guidance published in February 2025? I don't know if you've looked at that.
Well, very briefly, so I don't have them completely fresh in my mind. But if there is an invite to do more in-depth and continuous consultation, then we do align. But I think it's also a reminder that for whatever consultation we do, we should make sure that was there is people that don't normally get a say on intervention. So I think when we're stressing the importance of like really disabled people being part of those consultations is also thinking about when those consultations are happening and in which modalities are used. So for example, like making sure that people are paid for the time is quite important. Yeah.
And I can see, sorry, I hadn't noticed that before, but Harrie is also answering those questions in the chat. So please, people, have a look at the answered section of the Q&A. You should be able to see her contributions there, and I'll pick them up where I can. What else have we still got here? Oh, maybe that is it. Do I have any more hands up with questions? Have we come to an end? Yeah, I mean, I wonder whether you could talk a little bit more, Ersilia, about sort of what the kind of next steps are. What more you'd like to do?
No, thanks. So as I said, this is only a very small part of a very large project we'll be conducting at the University of Westminster. The project is also looking at LTNs impacts quantitatively. So we've been looking at impacts on congestion on boundary roads, impacts on levels of walking, wheeling, and cycling. So whether like LTNs are associated with high numbers of different numbers of people walking, wheeling, and cycling. We're looking at air pollution. We're looking at all sorts of impacts. So it's an invite to kind of keep your eyes open, because we'll be publishing a lot of results in the next few months. Some of these reflections are going to be also translated into a couple of videos, which are going to summarize our findings. So unfortunately, it wasn't ready for today, but we're going to have a small short video summarizing our findings with regard to disabled people experiences. So we'll be very happy to share those. And I think a couple of things, it would be really nice to continue studying those interventions, even where they're changing names, changing formats. I think local authorities are learning from LTNs and perhaps like thinking about other measures which have more public design, like redesign aspects embedded, and not just like being filtering, and study things outside London as well, because as much as I think London is a very important case studies, we've been mostly focused in London. I think someone was asking whether the LTNs were only in London. We have a couple of case studies which we studied quantitatively outside London, but because we needed to be sure the LTNs were to be implemented when we did the study, we decided to focus in London because we knew that there was more certainty that they were going to go ahead. But yes, let's just keep watching this space, and we'll be sharing a lot of findings in the next months. And if you have any questions or interest, you can drop me an email, and I'll be very happy to follow on.
And I've also found the questions disappeared because we were like answering them in tandem here. So I'll just pick up on a couple of those and read out Harrie's responses as well. So Morgan asked, thanks for the great overview and also taking on this topic. In your work with participants, did you find any evidence of people feeling left out of the LTN conversation, not just physically, but also because of the focus on active travel and particularly cycling, which is not always the most accessible mode? I guess the follow-up is then if this has an impact on the overall perception of LTNs more generally. And Harrie has said that, yeah, there was often a perception of LTNs as cycling interventions and also LTNs as classed interventions, or younger adult interventions people felt marginalised as a result of these. I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, Ersilia.
Well, I mean, Harrie's responded, but I think it links back to that discussion we had on how we communicate what these measures are about and for. And I think part of the focus on cycling is also because we missed a lot of opportunities in communicating why things are happening. But again, it's also like because there's not been much changes on pavements and on like the way streets look like, a lot of more greening and things could have changed a bit more. Also, like people's perception of what the intervention is about and was trying to achieve. So yeah.
Yeah. I'll just pick up a few more of these. So how much awareness, Veronica asked, how much awareness did you find of the benefits of adapted cycles? Did disabled people think they could or would use them if the roads were safe? And Harrie said that we had a few disabled participants who use cycle as mobility aids, and there was some wider awareness of the value of non-standard cycles as well as other mobility aids to benefit from LTNs. However, and this is, we've picked up on this already, cost and storage in particular were an issue. And then I think we've got Mark who said, did you find examples of non-disabled groups co-opting disability to support their opposition to LTNs rather than the concerns being expressed by disabled people themselves? And Harrie said always, but also important to recognise that non-disabled people also do this in support of LTNs. I think we've also kind of touched on. And that it simplifies a very complex experiences and creates an environment where disabled people can't share their voices and have productive conversations and how to move beyond that friction. I think we've picked up on that issue about London. And I think we might have covered all the questions, unless I've got any more in here. Yeah, Tim says he'd be interested. We can't answer this question, but we'd be interested to see what the views are when LTNs have been taken out. I guess if you kind of looking outside London, that might be something that you might look at in the future.
Yeah, this was a very good. Yeah, it's a very good question, because we actually, one of the schemes we're studying got ripped out halfway through, so we have this kind of incomplete data set. Yeah. It's just having the energy to do that, because this study has been so long and so big. But I think it would be really interesting, because like it's that like unfinished project which leaves a lot of questions open. Yeah, and nice to do if we had time. Thank you.
And Adam, and I'll take that as the last question before we wrap up.
Yeah, this one's kind of related to the fact that you mentioned you're doing a lot deeper study. Will you be revisiting the collision data analysis that you did in 2020? Because I think that was that particular study came out and said that was also referenced in the LTN review, but the study itself said that further study was going to be needed. So it would be really good if you did relook at that.
And I'm very happy to share that, yeah, we did do that, and we're just trying to get it published. We did study all the collision data and intersected that with LTNs across London, and the findings are quite good. So we will, the findings are like very, very interesting. They dropped me an email, it's under review as an academic paper, so hopefully it's going to be out in the next couple of months, but colleagues have been presenting it at different kind of conferences, and so we hopefully gonna present it soon, like in different venues and things.
How about here? Here'd be a good place to present it.
Yeah, I mean, happy. Jamie, my colleague, has been doing a lot of work on that, so I'm pretty sure they would be happy to if they get invited. Thanks.
Yeah, well, we're always happy to have you back.
Thank you so much.
Really great to hear more about it, and it's been really interesting to kind of to follow this research. Actually, Harrie has posted in the chat as well that you can sign, if you do want to follow, you can sign up to the mailing list. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
NIHR LTN at westminster.uk. That's in the chat. If you're happy with that, we could probably put that, as we've started to put the odd kind of link from and onto the website for people, and you'll be able to catch up a recording as well there. So please, can I ask everybody to big round of applause? Thank you very, very much to Harrie and Ersilia for coming and sharing their research and answering all those questions.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been brilliant to get these questions and get to think more about the research. And good luck with your work.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. And that just leaves me to say that next week we've got a double bill. We have Ben Coleman from Phil Jones Associates, who's going to discuss the creation of Oxfordshire's active travel network. And we have Oliver Lord from from Clean Cities campaign, who's going to talk about their car spreading campaign. So we'll see you back here at 5 next week, hopefully. Right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.